Thank you, Jim. That's great. You have talked about process, and you've sort of shown us process from the governance committee and the HR committee perspectives, and you've also, I think, shown or seen that being deliberate in processes, governance processes, is important. I wonder, could you take us into one of those committees and just elaborate on one particular process that you think would be, interesting and demonstrate this movement towards diversity?
Well, I think one area where boards are weak, and it's kind of human nature, is the evaluation of board members. And I think this is at the front end of this issue in a way. And most boards probably have a little fill out the box in evaluating what your talents and skills are so they can come up with a skills matrix. But I'm talking about really evaluating the performance of the board members, and that's their individual performance, then their performance as a group, and then matching their performance with the demands of the business. And no matter what business you're in, I guarantee you the business you were in 10 years ago is very different than the business you're in today, and the needs have changed, both on an individual basis, individual director basis, and on a collective basis. And you've got to have some way of making sure those things are in sync. Teachers had a very interesting process where they had a third party come in, individually interview board members, and in effect it wasn't a 360 because we didn't go up and down, but amongst the peers, ask the peers, how is Jane or Harry fitting in? How are they contributing? Are they monopolizing too much time? Are they basically what they're bringing to the board? And then that individual, it was always done anonymously, would sit down with each director and debrief them. Say, this is what this is how the group views you. This is what they value and what you bring. These are some suggestions for improvement, etc. And of course, would debrief with the chair so that the chair had a really good perspective on the skill and the performance of the board. Mm-hmm. So I think board evaluation processes will lead you down this route and pick up the pace for diversity of thought.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Now, you also were pretty definitive on your point of view around term limits. And now that doesn't work with Pamela's math, because I think she was looking for some some turnover. I'm just interested actually to hear from the three of you on the notion of term limits and how it could, should, or doesn't interplay with this topic.
Well, I'll start. I agree with Jim. I think term limits are a way to have difficult conversations when you don't want to initiate them yourself. Mm-hmm. So I think board assessment is I personally believe board assessments are the way to go, and it needs to be robust. I don't think there's a business out there today that does not assess how their employees are doing, how their management team's doing, how they're performing against their own scorecard. And I think it's really necessary that the board does the same thing, because they are so critical to a company's success. Mm-hmm. They're setting direction, and they're asking really tough questions to make sure that they hold management accountable. So I think that they also need to evaluate themselves to say, are we asking those tough questions? Does so-and-so ask the questions? Are they prepared? And so I think this is just another step, a cultural evolution, mm-hmm. and it's a much needed one. Mm-hmm. Because we do see, and the reason we started this, our whole multilateral instrument is really about improving performance of companies. Mm-hmm. And boards are critical to that performance.
So Maureen, what do you think then when companies are not embracing the assessment process as they should? Then do you believe then that term limits should be in place?
I believe that all boards need some form of assessment. If the comfort zone is a term limit, then maybe that's the way to go. If it's a 360, as Jim says, or external board assessment, or even if it's an board assessment, there needs to be some discussion about the need for everyone to perform, because those are very powerful seats. Mm-hmm. And every voice is really important at that table. So I don't believe in one size fits all. That's why we didn't set a quota.
Yeah.
That's why we didn't say this is the way written policy must be. But I think it's imperative that all boards assess their performance and think about, and Jim's right. I mean, we've talked about how everything has changed, technology's changed, the business climate has changed. We wouldn't be talking about, you know, you know, a 2% or a 1.5% inflation rate prior to 2009. The whole world's changed, and I think board governance needs to change with it.
So the other thing, Jim, that was really interesting in your stories was you compared public company boards and not-for-profit public sector boards, and you've had fulsome experiences in both. And you've really observed more progress in the public sector not-for-profit side around women's participation in senior leadership and boards. And I'm just interested in what you think is the source of that progress, why it's so different there.
Well, it might have just been the circumstance that when not-for-profits and public sector boards started to recruit, that all the males were taken up for the corporate side, and they realized very quickly that there was this huge pool of untapped talent that could bring great value to their organizations. So I think they were beneficiaries of what had gone on in the corporate sector, and they realized it first and have gotten there and staked their ground. So, and my bet is they'll fight to keep that ground of ensuring that they have diversity of thought. So they were first to the game. It's also benefited many women who have now had that experience and the opportunity to understand and learn what being a board member is all about, how you provide insight and oversight, and also the opportunity to expand their own network, and so that they can that can be, quote, a stepping stone. But I don't view not-for-profit, and I mean, I don't think we should think of not-for-profit and public sector boards as a stepping stone. I just think women were fortunate enough to realize that was a place they could get into more easily, and the organizations were smart enough to realize here was a huge pool of talent with, you know, less competition so they could get the best.
And Maureen, what do you see in terms of the network of these two seemingly different, but maybe not so different types of governance organizations, the public sector not-for-profit and then the public companies?
Well, I think a lot of women have used their experiences on not-for-profit boards to go through that first seminal experience of being on a board. But at the same time, they've met other people that weren't necessarily in their network, and they've managed to extend their network and get to know people on the corporate side and have formed relationships and trust with people so that they actually become part of someone in the corporate world's network. But it's being on a not-for-profit board can be very fulfilling because it's not just a corporation doing a particular type of job, an economic benefit. Often it speaks right to the core of the person, your personal wishes, and so it's a very fulfilling experience. I agree that I think not-for-profits out of necessity looked at very successful, talented people that they could get that would spend their time with them, and often it was the first experience for a woman who wanted to be on a board, but extremely fulfilling. So I don't think it's a pipeline necessarily. I think it's an opportunity for an experience.
Very good. Any other thoughts, Pamela, on how the not-for-profit?
Sure. So we have a corporate governance education program called Get On Board. And as you know, Shannon, your firm does the risk module in that. And we find that our intake for level 1 is of high potentials who are sent by their employers to come and hone business and leadership skills, to expand their network, to learn more about an organization, and take those learnings back to their employers. So we actually see it as a stepping stone because we believe that in order to serve, if you want to, on a corporate board, that it's helpful to have that nonprofit board experience to begin to learn about corporate governance. And so we think it's important to build that board career to make somebody board ready for an FP 500 board.
Interesting.